Okay, so we could talk about the parasha, but I was thinking maybe it makes sense to talk a little bit about Pesach because next week we may or may not able to meet. I don't know. We'll see if the matzah is ready, if the bitter herbs are ready. We'll see if the wine is ready. So we'll see. But in any case, we don't want to come to the Seder unprepared. So we want to talk a little bit about Passover, I think. And there's obviously a lot to talk about, but there are different things. But I think that we can think about sort of a general theme and also a general theme that really pops up throughout the Passover night and especially throughout the Passover Haggadah, the story that we tell and the way we tell it and the points that we emphasize. So I think we can look at some overarching insights. And I guess the first place to start with is what are we celebrating at the Exodus? And we're celebrating freedom. We were freed from the Egyptians. Now, the question becomes, what's the point of celebrating freedom? Or is there a point? Is there a point of celebrating freedom when we're not necessarily sure that we are free? In other words, today, if you live in the United States of America in 2025, you have relative freedom. So I think you are free. But the Passover was celebrated throughout Jewish history. And throughout Jewish history, for most of Jewish history, the Jewish people were under some form or another of exile. And they did not have political freedom. And they didn't have freedom of, even just basic civil rights. And then the question becomes, so the Jewish people, of course, Passover is one of them, probably the major holiday and the major a defining event of Judaism. And we talk about it all the time. And we celebrate it every year. And a tremendous amount of attention is given to the Passover in general, the theme of Passover, but especially the Passover night. There's all these customs that you have to actually put yourself in the state of freedom and act as if you were free. And therefore, like the reclining is an example. And people had all these customs where they would put out all beautiful dishes on the table, even if they're not going to use every last dish, but put out all the silver they had and all the gold they had. So we make a big deal about celebrating freedom. So the question is, how could you celebrate freedom if you're not really free? And for most of history, we weren't always free. And even today, you can ask, are we really free? And if you look around and ask the situation of the Jewish people in the world today, in Israel, out of Israel, are we better off? Are we worse off? Are we heading? Are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving in the wrong direction? So there's a lot of pessimism out there, not just pessimism, a lot of negativity out there. And again, this is just today. If you look about the past, there was serious oppression and serious serious oppression and serious, in a way, enslavement. And yet we are ignoring all of that. And we're saying, oh, it's Passover. We're celebrating freedom. What does that mean? And what is the purpose of that? And what is the I guess, what's the benefit? And how is that connected to reality? So that's one question. And another question is, okay, that's one question. Go ahead, Bob, please.
Good morning, Rabbi. I loved your synopsis of each of the books of the Torah last week. I think you said Exodus is more than freedom; it was nationhood. I think Bereshit you said was start
Family.
a family, and isn't Passover more nationhood than it is freedom? Because to your point, are we free? I mean, freedom is kind of nebulous.
Yes.
As where nationhood is more
Yeah,
concrete.
I agree. If we put it all on, yeah, I agree that first of all, I have to agree because I said it. No, I don't. I could change my mind. That's okay. Uh, um, I had the teacher in the yeshiva, where he said one day he comes some and he puts out a thesis and he says A, and tomorrow he comes and he says the opposite. He says B. So the kid said, "How could you disagree? How could you say you said A? I said yesterday." He said, "That's not a question. Yesterday that makes sense. Today this makes sense. There's not a question what I said yesterday. I'm not bound by what I said yesterday. No, but I think that's very true about the book of Exodus. That it's freedom is step one, but then you have to grow into nationhood. I 100% agree. And as you point out, I think you're alluding to it, is that we're celebrating nationhood, and nationhood we definitely do have, right? Even if we're in a difficult situation, if we could be if we could be being oppressed in Western Europe or in Eastern Europe or anywhere else, so we are still a nation, and we are very much a nation. So that would help. That helps. So thank you, Bob. Now I could do a little bit of Passover Seder. Thank you. Having said that, specifically, not just the book of Exodus, but specifically the night of Passover, the sages say, and the rabbis say, and the Mishnah says, and the Talmud says, they're pumping one word, cherut, 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 freedom, freedom, freedom. And everything you do is freedom. And if you ate the matzah, you didn't recline, you have to eat the matzah again because you didn't eat it in a manner of freedom. And then you have to drink 4 cups of wine. Why 4 cups of wine? In addition to the simple reason, which is to give me a headache, you also have to drink wine because that's what the free people did. So the point is, there is an element of freedom. So it's nationhood, yes, I'm not disagreeing with that, but there's also an emphasis on freedom. And as this Mishnah says, and we say it in the Haggadah, a person has to see not only as his ancestors left Egypt, but he left Egypt, and the idea of the word cherut, freedom, the word nifdeta, you were redeemed. There is definitely an element of freedom in addition to the nationhood, or I would say freedom to be able to create nationhood. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think we have to explore the concept of freedom as well, put that into the puzzle, because it's certainly the rabbis and the Mishnah and the Talmud and the authors of the Haggadah are giving us are trying to pull us to freedom and maybe giving us a definition of what are we celebrating and how are we celebrating, and hopefully we can get a little into that. Go ahead, Ben, please.
Yeah, I was just saying that we're talking so far. We've just talked about physical freedom, freedom from the toils, and freedom from the oppression of the Pharaoh. But there's a mental freedom that it also, which moving out of slave mentality, which is internal to who we are, and we can achieve that a different kind of freedom, even if in the face of physical oppression, I guess.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct that freedom entails in addition to physical freedom, which is whether or not I'm in prison, whether or not someone is controlling my actions, whether or not someone has control of my destiny in the physical sense. There's also the spiritual freedom. And when you talk about the spiritual freedom, it's much more internal. What is my attitude? What is my response? Where is my spirit? And that, as you correctly point out, that's what we believe we receive at Passover, is the ability and the empowerment and the energy to always remain internally free. I was just listening to a talk that the Rebbe spoke on his birthday, which is a few days before Passover, the 11th of Nisan. I think it was 1976, and the Rebbe said that a few days earlier, there was a big deal in the news, and everybody was talking about it, and everybody was shaking. What happened? Howard Hughes passed away. Howard Hughes in those days was a billionaire, and before billionaires were common. Today, every kid's a billionaire. But in those days, to have $2 billion was a big deal. So everybody was talking about Howard Hughes, and the Rebbe said, I got the news of Howard Hughes. Everyone's shaking. What's the lesson? So the Rebbe says it must be related to Passover. Okay, so what's the lesson? The lesson is like this. Here you had a person who had all the means to live a free life, but he was internally in prison because he was frightened that people are trying to kill him. And I think he died of malnourishment, right? So we're talking about somebody who physically he had all the abundance and all the freedom, but internally he was bound, he was trapped. And then the Rebbe said you can have somebody who was in a concentration camp, but if your attitude, you're in control of your attitude, then you're internally free. So that's a very powerful message, and it's very, very true. And that is correct. That when we talk about freedom, we are talking about not just physical freedom, but spiritual freedom as well. And that's critical, because if you don't have spiritual freedom, you're going to lose your physical freedom. So that's an excellent point. So I'm happy all these points are coming up. But I would again say, yes, we're celebrating spiritual freedom, but we're also celebrating physical freedom. Is there a point in celebrating that? Right? So I agree. It's very important. Spiritual freedom is key, because otherwise freedom is technical. If the oppressors yesterday told you to go into prison, and today told you to go out of prison, and now you're out of prison, you're not any more free internally. Yesterday you listened to the oppressor, and today you're listening to the oppressor. And that's how we talk about this notion. We talked about the book of Exodus. We talked about this a few times, that built into the story of the Exodus is the defiance. right? That the people have to escape Egypt. Moshe says, we're only leaving for 3 days. Why 3 days? Moshe could have said, he had Pharaoh under the threat of death. He could have gets Pharaoh to sign the document. You can leave forever. No, we don't want to leave forever. We only want to leave for 3 days. Why? That's bad negotiation. You have a moment. Get Pharaoh. The iron is soft. Get Pharaoh to free the people forever. No, there's no such thing. We have to defy. So we'll get out. We'll promise to come back. Then we'll defy. So that's very true. You must have the internal spiritual freedom. Correct. So that's part of it. Absolutely. But
I guess I was just tying it back into what you said a few weeks ago about the golden calf
yeah,
and how there was the golden calf, and then you pointed out to materialism and other kinds of things that every other thing that gets pursued is unless it's spiritually related to to the oneness of God, then you're tied into
to be enslaved.
that an anti-monotheistic kind of
Yeah.
belief system, and that's what we're getting out of when we get out of Egypt, and we
Sure. Yeah.
have to head towards that in the head. So
Absolutely, no question about it. What you're saying is 100% true. I agree, 100%. I just like I said, we're going to see. Maybe there's more, but I agree with you 100%. The ethics of the father is a beautiful, beautiful teaching. They say, someone who has more possessions has more worry. Doesn't have to be that way, but it could be that the more real estate holdings you have, the more enslaved you are, because now you can't think about anything else. You're too busy thinking about your possessions. Now, of course, that's not the goal. The goal is to have possessions and have those possessions serve you instead of you serving them, right? But material wealth and material even freedom does not ensure internal freedom. So that's very important, because I could have whatever I have, and I could be serving it. I could be serving it. I'm serving it, or is it serving me? And that's true about my car, my cell phone, my yacht, my private jet, whatever it is that I have. It could be it's serving me, or am I serving it? That's an important question. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rabbi, one of the things that I love about you and our seminar is not what you tell us, but that you stimulate creativity. And here's the thought that came to me. I don't see the Exodus either as freedom or as nationhood. And Bob will be amused by this. I see it as birth.
Yeah.
I see it as a baby being born. And basically, I never thought about it that way, but we weren't a nation, and we really weren't free. We just got out of there. We just came out of the womb. So basically, maybe we should celebrate birth.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd say that
Bob's laughing, but I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, so the metaphor of birth for the exodus of Egypt as birth is something that goes way back. Even the prophet Ezekiel talks a lot about that where our birth is at Sinai, is at the Exodus. And if you think about it, people don't like, Western people don't like blood because we're so disconnected from nature. So we don't like blood. So this whole idea that you take blood and you put it on the doorposts and you put it on the lintel, and then God is going to pass over because there's blood. And I don't want to get gory here, but in addition to the blood of the Pesach offering, the sages say there was also the blood of circumcision, because you had to be circumcised to eat of the flesh of the Pesach offering. So there's a lot of blood. It's very bloody. Okay, what else is bloody? What else is bloody? Labor and delivery is also bloody, right? If you think about it, right? So that's a sign of life. And the Passover, the blood of Passover, and some people see that as the blood of birth. And if you want to think about this, it's very funny, because it's actually very funny. I think this is funny. So the Torah tells you have to eat past the Pesach offering in haste, because we're in a rush, because we're leaving Egypt. So the Torah gets down to the exact ritual that in Egypt, that first time that they celebrated Passover, by the way, was before they left, right? They celebrated Passover in Egypt the night of the 15th, before midnight. They had to finish it by midnight, and they only left the next morning or the next midday. But in any case, you have to eat it in haste. How do you eat something in haste? How do you show that you're in a rush? So you sit down, you have to have your belt girded so you can walk on your walking stick and put your shoes on, and then show that you're ready and eat it in haste because we're about to leave. So it's very funny that you're eating it in haste, you're rushing, but you already have 2 weeks to prepare. So what's the rush? Right? 2 weeks earlier, God tells them how it's going to be, and we're not going to leave to the next day. So everything is planned, but everything is in a rush. What does that remind you of? It reminds you of giving birth. What happens? You have 9 months to prepare to go to the hospital, and the doctor has 9 months to prepare. And yet it's always a rush. So what's the rush? We knew about this. No, the moment of birth is always a rush. And in a way, that's the birth of Passover. So it is birth, and that's going to tie into hopefully what we're going to talk about is also it's the beginning. So I'm giving you a little bit of I'm taking from you, but this is a little a preview of where we're going. I would say it's the birth of freedom, if you want to think. So it is freedom. It is freedom. It is birth. By the way, birth is freedom. The womb, the child in the womb of the mother is very comfortable, and when it comes out of the womb, it's distressed. If it's not distressed, you're in trouble. Correct me if I'm wrong, doctor. Right? If the child is not distressed, we're in trouble. So birth is distressful because why? Because everything is comfortable. You're fed, you're taken care of, you're protected. Everything is fine. What don't you have? You don't have independence. Like the Talmud says, the ubar, the fetus, is a limb of the mother. Okay, so everything is fine. You know, say we're celebrating a birthday. What are you celebrating a birthday? It's the day that you were taken out of a protective shelter and dispatched into a challenging world. Why is that a day of joy? It should be a day of mourning. Because so what did you get? What did you get at birth? What you got at birth is independence. Independence is freedom. Now, freedom is distressful, at least in the beginning. Freedom could be painful, right? Freedom could be lonely, right? But so this idea of freedom and idea of birth are actually very much connected. But we're going to talk about that, how Passover is freedom, but it's also like the beginning of freedom, the birth of freedom. The birth of freedom does not mean that all our problems are solved. Birth of freedom means we're starting the process. So I already gave you everything you need to know. Go ahead.
Rabbi, you also stimulated something else in me, which is very relevant. If an adolescence isn't stressful, then the person really doesn't develop an identity. If you sail through adolescence with no pain, probably haven't grown, you're probably not ready to be an adult because you're still tied to your parents.
Yeah, and
so people get upset about adolescents being distressed. They should be more upset when an adolescent isn't distressed.
Right. And there has to be, now, of course, there's measures of distress and adolescence. There also has to be rebellion.
That's right.
That's rebellion. And rebellion is painful both for the child and for the parent. Just like giving birth. I don't know, but I'm told that it's also painful for the parents. So the idea that there has to be a certain degree of separation, and it's sometimes painful, but that separation allows for independence and freedom, and then maybe deeper connection, right? If you're connecting, if you're reconnecting, if your child now has its own identity and now comes back for the Passover Seder, not because it has to. When the child is 10 years old, it has no choice. It has to come to your Passover Seder because it has no choice. Where is it going to go? Right? But it comes back as an independent person. So that's a little nachas. That's a little joy. Okay. So that's that. So we have all the answers. So what is my job? My job is to make more questions. When one question is not good enough, you have to make more questions, because if there's no questions, what are we going to talk about? It's Passover. You got to create questions, the 4 questions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. The problem with Passover is, the problem with this question of why are we celebrating freedom? Why are we celebrating freedom? How are we celebrating freedom? Are we really free if there's external oppression? And it's not just spiritual freedom. The answer is not just spiritual freedom. The answer is that God took us out of Egypt and brought the 10 plagues and saved us. So there's an element of spiritual freedom as well. Physical freedom. So the question is, so how does that square when we don't feel that freedom? That's the question. You have different answers, but that's the question. I want to make the question stronger. What's the question stronger? If you look at the actual liturgy, you will keep seeing not only an emphasis on freedom, but also a reminder that we are still in the exile. In other words, we're not painting the Talmud. If the Talmud would say, if the Mishnah would say, you know what, one night a year, close your doors, close the shades, ignore the oppressors outside, ignore the communists, ignore the Inquisition, ignore the Nazis, ignore all the bad guys outside. Close yourself in your little dining room or living room or in your cellar and imagine that everything is fine. Imagine that's what the sages would say. Okay, I could see why you would want to do that. You want to have the vision, you want to have the dream. I could see why you would want to do that. But the problem is the Torah is telling us to do that, which means create us, enact freedom. Okay, I could see that, enacting freedom. But the Torah also, why we're commanded to enact freedom, the Torah keeps telling us, oh, by the way, you're not free. So in that space where we're supposed to enact freedom, the Torah reminds us that we're not free. Or the Haggadah reminds us that we still have serious problems. So what's the point of doing that? How could I be in both spaces at once? So what I want to do is I want to open up the liturgy of the Haggadah, very famous paragraph, because one of the reasons it's so famous is because it is right in the beginning. So even the people who get hungry before you read the entire Magid, before you read the entire section of the story, but most people would read because it's right in the beginning. So I'm going to read one little paragraph, and it's a strange paragraph. Almost every close of that paragraph is strange. And all the three clauses, they're all strange, and put them all together is even more strange. And why is it here, and what's it doing in here? So there's a lot to talk about, but I'm focusing on the question, why remind us that we're still slaves if you were trying to enact freedom? Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. I think I got it. I think the technology is still working. I think, yeah, here we go. So this is Magid. What happens is we break the middle, we make the kiddush, we dip the vegetable, we break the middle matzah, and we start telling the story. What's the first thing we do when we tell the story? At least according to the Chabad, well, to this custom, I think it's the Chabad custom, it's other customs as well. Says the Haggadah, we raise the tray with the matzot and say, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Wonderful. That's good. That's a good statement. Everything, who could disagree? Whoever, by the way, that statement is also questionable, but we're not going to get into that right now. Maybe next Friday. Whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is in need, let him come and conduct the Seder of Passover. That's nice. You're inviting people. What could be nicer than that? This year, we are here. Next year, in the land of Egypt. This year, we are slaves. Next year, we will be free people. This is very powerful. Hashata Avdim. We say it in Aramaic, so everybody should understand. When this was written, some people, most people didn't know Hebrew fluently, maybe like today, outside the land of Israel, but everyone knew Aramaic. So we make sure to say in Aramaic, Hashata Avdin. This year, everybody is slaves. Next year, we'll be free. Take it easy. One second. So you were gathering together. Why are we gathering together? To celebrate the fact that God took us out of Egypt 3,300 years ago. Okay. So first of all, why remind us that we're slaves now? And second of all, what does it help me that God took me out of Egypt then if I'm a slave now? So in other words, this paragraph, this introductory paragraph, is literally undermining the entire point of the Seder, seemingly. It's seemingly undermining the entire point of the Seder. And that's just an example of the first paragraph. There are other examples of things that we do that remind us of the slavery, even though I guess we put in a lot of energy to try to almost ignore the aspect that we're living in less than perfect times and focus on the reenactment of the great miracles and the great freedom. So again, the question would be is why are we doing this? And that's obviously leading us to a deeper point. We have to first discover what are we trying to do and what exactly is the theme here, and then we can understand why we're doing this. So that's for the questions. And we still need a few more minutes for answers, right? Otherwise, it's just questions, which is not terrible, you know. They say a story about one of the Chabad Rebbes whose son came to him at night and asked him a very difficult question about the existence of God. Does God exist? Does God not exist? And the father said, oh, okay, it's a good question. And for the kid, this was very troubling. You know, this was very intense. Maybe there's no God. If there's no God, what are you going to do? Okay. Father says, no problem. His father says, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Go to sleep. The kid goes to sleep. And then the kid wakes up and he says, Father, what's the answer to my question? He says, answer your question. Oh, we'll talk about it when we have time. We have to go to shul. We have to daven. We have to pray. Okay, they go to shul. Then the kid says, they finished davening. The kid says, no. So what's the answer to my question? He says, oh, question? We have to eat breakfast first. We don't have time for questions. Let's eat breakfast. So they eat breakfast. Then they say, oh, we have to go on a walk. And after the walk, God, the father sits down and answers the question.
Let's test it and see if
So the child tells the father 1 second. He says, you knew the answer all along. Why didn't you tell me last night? He says, no, that was the whole point. My point is that a question won't kill you. That was the lesson. And you can eat breakfast and you can go to sleep and you can take a walk and the question's okay. The question never killed anybody. So that was the lesson. Why am I saying this? Because we have a lot of questions. It's okay, but I'm afraid that no one's going to be able to sleep tonight if you don't have the answer to this question. So I have to make sure to talk a little bit about the answer as well. Go ahead, Ben, please.
But I just had one quick question, which is we just started in the Parsha in Leviticus, and we've already read the story of the Exodus and the Passover. I know that the Jewish calendar had, that is solar and lunar because of Passover, because it says that Passover has to be in the spring, and yet the Parsha doesn't really line up
Yeah.
with the Haggadah or with Passover, and like we're pretty past it. We're into, we're even out of the Exodus.
Right.
So
So
I just wondered, any thoughts on that?
the technical reason is because the reading of the cycle of the year doesn't follow the seasons of the year. We start right after Yom Kippur, right after Simchas Torah, Simchas Torah, right after Yom Kippur. We start at the beginning of the year and we go in order. So the simple answer is it's just in order. And by the way, every holiday we actually break from the annual cycle and read about that parsha specifically because the annual cycle does not follow that time of the year. However, there must be a spiritual reason. I think for me, when we study the Torah, we're supposed to connect to the energy of that week. So for me, we start the beginning of Exodus sort of in the, I don't want to use this word, the dead of winter, but when winter is very harsh. And we have to remember that the spring is coming. In other words, if you think about it, right, there's no biblical holidays between whatever it is, October and April, okay? More or less, depending on the year. So you have 6 months, you have 5 months with no biblical holidays. So we have Hanukkah and Purim, rabbinic holidays. So maybe that in the winter, you still have to, we need a light at the end of the tunnel. We have to know it's not Passover yet, but don't worry, in 2 months, Passover is coming. Now that's what it does for me. Maybe that's the right reason, maybe not. That's what it does for me. It's very comforting for me when I'm like, okay, it's February. And I'm like, okay, so when are we moving on? When are the flowers coming out? Not just physically, but also spiritually. When are we going to feel the renewal? Because I love the winter, but I also get tired of the winter very quickly because I'm not a skier. So I love the winter. I love when it comes and I love when it goes. I love it for the first few weeks. So I need to have, so I think spiritually, I think that there's an element of renewal, even if you're not going to actually do it, because the anniversary for the renewal is Passover. And we believe that there's no anniversaries. We believe it's the recreation of that energy. So Pesach is when you get the energy for renewal and freedom for the entire year. But I think that we talk about it earlier and you could already start connecting to that energy a little bit early. That's how I see it. That's how I feel. But that's not the answer. That's my answer, but it's not the answer. Okay. Okay, fine. Let's think about the big picture and we'll put all the pieces of the puzzle together. We are celebrating freedom. We're celebrating birth. But freedom, despite popular opinion, freedom does not necessarily mean that all our problems have been solved. In fact, this built into the story of the Exodus is that it is not a complete Exodus. It's not a complete freedom. It's not a freedom that will solve all our problems because very quickly we will fall back into different forms of negativity and slavery, internal and external. That's the story of our history. So if you think about it, we're not celebrating and saying God solved our problems or we solved our problems after God helped us, whatever the case is. We're in a good state. We're in a state of perfection, or we're in a state of positivity. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that the Exodus from Egypt is a complex story. Yes, we were taken out of Egypt, but we were not taken out of Egypt fully. In other words, our problems were not solved fully, and everybody here said a different element. Were we spiritually free? Did we have the mentality of freedom? Right? So there's different elements. But even the actual state of freedom, even the physical freedom, we regressed over history. So if you're celebrating the idea that now we are a free people, there would be no point to celebrating that if we lost that freedom. Why would you celebrate that? Imagine 4th of July, we got American independence. God forbid if we lose the independence. There would be no point of celebrating the independence once we lost it, right? What's the point? But the Passover Seder is different. The Passover story is not that we achieved independence, even physical independence. The Passover story is that we achieved freedom, but the definition of freedom is the beginning of freedom. And that's what Dr. John said about the birth. And birth means you were born, you have the potential, but it takes time to reach to the full potential, and there may be setbacks. But you're still celebrating. Why are you celebrating? Because when we got Passover, we got the beginning of the process, and we got the inspiration and the potential to finish and conclude the process. And that is actually beautifully interpreted in even the last paragraph that we said before, that we read from the actual Haggadah, where he says, this year we're slaves. Obviously, this was written once the Jewish people lost their political freedom. Maybe it was written in Babylonia or later. But in any case, here we have, what do we have here? We have this year we are slaves. Next year we will be free people. This year we are here. Next year in the land of Israel. So now we have to reimagine, what are we talking about? We're not necessarily celebrating and saying, thank God we have everything we need. Thank God we have freedom. Thank God everything is perfect. No, God gave us freedom, gave it to us. We have the potential to make it a complete freedom. But that's a journey. That's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. There are setbacks. But so on one hand, we say we're not in a good state. We're slaves. There are poor people we have to invite. What happened if we were free and we left Egypt and we had great wealth? What happened? We regressed. So what's the point of celebrating if you're regressing? The answer is we're not regressing. We have the beginning of the process, and we have so we're celebrating the beginning of the process, but more importantly, we're celebrating the beginning of the process because we know that the beginning of that process is the empowerment to be able to lead to its conclusion. And that's why when we read the Haggadah and we talk about how in every generation, even today, people, as we say, B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, not just one person stood up to destroy us, but in every generation, there are people who constantly stand up to destroy us. And that's true, and we've seen it. If we forgot, we have just seen it. So the point here is, why are you reminding us? Why are you popping the bubble? We're trying to celebrate freedom. Why are we popping the bubble? Because we're not disconnected from reality. We know that the situation is not perfect, but we have the faith that because of Passover, because of the freedom that we got, and because of the blessing that we got, we now have the potential to move that forward and expand it until we get to the complete redemption, which is in the future, hopefully next year. And like the previous Rebbe of Chabad said, it doesn't mean we have to wait a full year. It means by the time next year comes, we'll already be in Jerusalem. Okay, go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. I think you just gave me the answer to the question I was struggling with ever since. Every time we read about Exodus, every time we think about Exodus, why couldn't Jewish people just pack up and leave? Why did they have to cry out to God? And
right.
They couldn't live by themselves, so they need some kind of higher power to free them. So every time we are feeling that we don't have that full freedom, whether it's spiritual, physical, or intellectual, or whatever, every time we have that, we need to call out to God. We need to learn Torah and be liberated the true way. And it also, that applies, maybe the doctors will appreciate, how to internally liberate yourself from dependencies from other, enslavement, internal enslavement. We cannot do it ourselves. We need to call to higher power. Right.
So it's very interesting because there's both elements in this story. And this is very consistent with Judaism in general, but Kabbalah in particular. We always talk about this, the awakening from below and awakening from above. And if you open the Rabbi Shneur Zalman's, we didn't read the Parsha, but Rabbi Shneur Zalman's interpretation of Likutei Torah and his discourses on this Parsha, that's what he talks about, the awakening from above and awakening from below and the advantage and disadvantage of each. And that's the first discourse they study in high school in Chabad yeshivas. So you need something greater than you to be able to create that freedom, to hook you up to that freedom. But freedom, on the other hand, freedom cannot be given to you. You have to take it. So there's both the elements of blessing from above, opening from above. God has to start the process. The Talmud says, someone who is tied up cannot untie themselves, right? I could be the strongest person in the room. I could know how to lift 200 pounds of weights. But if my hands are tied, I cannot untie myself. I need someone outside of myself to untie myself. But so we need that higher power. But that higher power cannot solve all our problems. Freedom means that we have that level of independence, that we're able to create that experience for ourselves, right? So that's the awakening from below. You have to know how to inspire yourself, right? Let's say I'm a person. When we were in Israel in camp in the summer, there was a tour guide, a great tour guide, American guy, lived in Rosh Pina, which is a beautiful town that overseeing the Kinneret. So he would step out of his house, he sees the Kinneret. And you know, it doesn't rain in Israel, but sometimes it's cloudy days. So we would say, my friends would joke, and he would say, when you go outside, if there's a cloud on top of the Kinneret, this guy has a bad day. Because he was very in tune to the beauty. So some people, and they could be in a good day. Whenever the sun is shining, it's a good day. They're in a good mood. It's beautiful. Inspiration from above. If you're that person, you have to be the person that even when it's a cloudy day like right now, you have to be able, if you want to be free, you have to be able to generate inspiration by yourself. Make yourself in a good mood. Because if you're dependent on something outside of you, then it's a dependence. It doesn't really matter what the dependence is. It could be a natural substance. It could be the weather. It could be the sun. It could be God. Because when God makes the sun shine over the Kinneret, it's God saying good morning. But the point is, but I'm not free unless I could create that by myself. And I would say that the reason why God some days makes it a nice day on the Kinneret is to show me what inspiration feels like. It says, this is how it feels like when you're happy. Now go create that even when the sun is not shining, right? So it's a combination. You cannot have one without the other, because if I never had the sun shining on me, literally or figuratively, then I don't know what inspiration looks like, right? So you have, so any metaphor. I could talk about music. So I went to a concert and I was inspired. If I would not go to the concert, I wouldn't be inspired. But if I only can be inspired when I go to the concert, either I'm going to be in concert halls all day or I'm going to be broke because I can't afford the tickets. So you go home and you learn a few keys on the computer, on the keyboard. Now, of course, my music is not as grand as the orchestra, but I can do it on my own. I can create that on my own. And I'm not dependent on something outside of me for that music, right? So all these metaphors, so which one is more important? To going to the orchestra or learning a few keys on your own, right? It's the way you always have those two elements, awakening from above and awakening from below, because really we're in a relationship, and a relationship is not one way, it's two way.
But
So,
what is the first step in liberation? Because
I think birth is, at least Egypt, it's birth. Birth is the fetus doesn't do anything. It has to be, it depends what stage in life you're holding. It depends. The short answer is it depends. But if you want to talk about the big picture of life, the big picture of life is the beginning God does for you, or your parents do for you, right? Or things are given to you, right? Hopefully, unless God forbid there was abuse or other things. But in general, in a perfect world, the beginning you get unconditional love. If not, that's a very big problem. Then that's a very big problem. But a child, a very young child, is supposed to receive, if everything is healthy, the child is supposed to receive everything, unconditional love. And God is doing it for you. Your mother's doing it for you, hopefully. Then there's the process of, I got to do this for myself. Now, when I'm stuck, sometimes when I'm stuck throughout my life, it's not just when I'm a young child. Sometimes when I'm stuck, you have to go to a different party who's more objective and doesn't suffer from this specific problem, to help me see to help me see the I don't want to say the word truth, but to help me see beyond my problem. Now, that person doesn't necessarily have to be smarter than me or better than me, because it's just that he's just not emotionally embedded in the problem, right? If I'm stuck in the pit, someone else can pull me out. Tomorrow he'll be stuck in a different pit. I could pull him out of his pit, right? It's not a question of who's better or who's worse. It's a question is, you can't untie yourself. So there comes a certain time where you need a friend, you need a mentor, right? The ethics of the fathers say the Charav, make a mentor for yourself and acquire a friend. Acquire a friend. Shouldn't friendships be organic? No. You have to invest in friendships. You have to go to meet people. It's more comfortable to read a book in bed. No, go to where people are, connect, come onto the Zoom, see people, connect. So it takes a certain investment, because you need someone else to pull you out of your situation. That is what the freedom that Hashem gives you. But Passover right away goes into the 7 weeks of self-refinement that leads up to receiving of the Torah. Right away from the awakening from above, you have to have an awakening from below. So now your friend helped you. Now what are you going to do? Every time you have a problem, you're going to call your friend. Your friend is not going to be able to solve all your problems, right? He pulled you out of the pit. Now get onto the track. Now do what you have to do, right? So the short answer is it depends. Sometimes it works the other way. Sometimes below, from a Kabbalah's perspective, an awakening from below elicits an awakening from above, right? When you take an action, I'm not in a good mood, but I do something positive, that putting that out into the universe is going to elicit from above positivity to come my way. So sometimes there's an awakening from above that elicits the awakening from below, and sometimes it's the opposite. That from below I do something, I start playing music, and then I'm inspired to go out to the concert, right? So which one comes first? Which one comes second? It depends. Sometimes I'm stuck. When I'm stuck, and sometimes I need external help. It depends. I take whatever I can get. Sometimes I have to push, and sometimes you don't have someone else outside of you, so you have to call to Hashem.
Right,
And that's
that,
what we do prayer.
that's exactly what the story is telling us, right? Because if we didn't cry out to God, he wouldn't come.
Yeah. And we have that in the prayer. In a prayer a lot, we say, even before the Shema, the blessings of the Shema, right before the Shema, we ask God to turn to us with compassion. If a person feels stuck in their internal battle with the negativity, then one option is to call to Hashem, because again, the crying and the pain, the distress is in itself a sign of freedom, right? The problem is when you're too comfortable. If a person is comfortable in the cell, then that's the real tragedy, right? As long as you're feeling distress, then you're healthy. This is not your space. This is not where I belong. This is not my native space. So that itself, the act of crying to Hashem is a demonstration to Hashem. I did enough. In other words, that my awareness, I have the awareness of freedom. Sometimes the awareness of freedom is the awareness of pain. I know I'm trapped. If someone doesn't know they're trapped, they don't even have an awareness of freedom. So
Right.
Even calling out to Hashem, in a way, is an awakening from below. And by the way, if you look at the story of Exodus, in the story of Exodus, I think it's the end of chapter 2, it does, God, the burning bush happens only after the people call out to Hashem. King of Egypt dies. The Jewish people, they groaned. I think that's the translation. And then Vayitzaku, they cried to Hashem. They didn't know how to articulate even. The Kabbalah talks about they couldn't speak, but they could scream. Oh, they're screaming. Okay, Moshe, burning bush. Why? You already have freedom. If you know you're in pain, you're already on the right track.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so let's just sum up, because it's 11 o'clock. What are we saying? We're saying when you're going to be the Haggadah, and you're going to hear about the negative things that are in our life. Number 1, we have poor people. Number 2, we have to invite them. Number 3, we're still slaves. Number 4, we're out of Israel. Number 5, there are people who want to destroy us every generation, including today, maybe now more than ever. So what is this? 1 second. How this is undermining the entire feeling of freedom and joy that I was working for a month to cultivate. I cleaned my house. I bought new flowers. I bought the matzah. I'm enacting freedom. Why are you telling me all this negativity? And the answer is, for us, freedom does not mean that all our problems are solved. Freedom means that we celebrate the fact that God took us out of Egypt. The Exodus was incomplete. It is our job to take that energy and blessing and work toward the complete redemption. So work toward next year making it better. But it's not that we're saying it's only hopeful. We're celebrating the past because we realize that the blessings of the past give us the power for the present to work and make a better future. So that's how the Haggadah really is going past, present, future. And by the way, that first passage that I read is past, present, future. It starts that this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. And then it says, now, whoever's hungry, come and eat. By the way, that's freedom. You're reaching out to somebody else. You go beyond your own ego. Rabbi Sachs writes about this. The Rebbe talks about this. Rabbi Sachs talks about this, right? That the freedom is when you can feel the other person is hungry. That's when you're freed from your own ego. So that's the middle phrase is the present. And then we say next year in Israel, next year free, that's future. So that same passage is past, present, future, because that's what freedom means. Freedom means it's not that, oh, they freed us, so now we evaluate, are we still in a good situation? If yes, then we're still free. If no, then we're not free. But in other words, it's given to us. No, freedom is it's given to us, and now what are we going to do with it? And we're continuing the expansion of freedom. So it's not just in the moment, it's not just the past, it's not just in the moment, it's all three. It's past, present, and future. So that's the pitch. I hope this was enjoyable and insight and thought provoking. That's the main thing, and question provoking, because Passover is about provoking questions. So thank you all for joining.
Thank
Shabbat-
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, we'll be in touch about next week. Hopefully, we can get together for a few minutes. Unless everybody's preparing the bitter herbs, I don't want to take people away from the practical side of Judaism. But okay, we'll see. Okay.
Okay.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom. Thank you.